This is the Marketing Podcast Network.
Welcome to Uncorking a Story, the podcast that introduces you to the rich world of storytellers who share their personal journeys, creative processes, and the stories behind their stories, one conversation at a time. I'm your host, Mike Carlin, and I'm thrilled to be part of your writing journey. If you're an aspiring writer, a literary enthusiast, or simply someone who believes in the transformative power of words, you've come to the right place. Every week, we'll pop the cork on the world of successful storytellers and give you a healthy pour of inspiration, insight, and empowerment. My mission is to help writers like you realize your full potential through the transformative and therapeutic power of writing. Whether you're just starting your literary voyage or looking to refine your craft, I'm here to provide you with the knowledge, inspiration, and encouragement you need to embark on your own storytelling adventure. So, are you ready to uncork your story and let your creativity flow? Uncorking a Story is about to begin. Sit back, relax, and let the transformative magic of storytelling whisk you away. Welcome to Uncorking a Story. Ganesh Venkataramanan is a graduate from the prestigious Indian Institute of Technology and works as a vice president at a software technology company. With his background in science and experience in working with highly analytical teams, Ganesh found that scientific explanations alone lack depth and human understanding. In his attempt to better understand life, he stumbled across religion and then Jesus. His book, Let Me Into Heaven, Three Computer Scientists Find Their Way to Life, came out last year. And welcome to Uncorking a Story, Ganesh.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Ganesh, I'm excited to have you on. I'm curious, where does your story as an author begin?
Yeah, so it started in 2020. And as I was sitting home with COVID, I was very interested in the subject of heaven. And I became a Christian as an adult. And so didn't always understand the different parts of the theology. But I knew that the big reward was eternity. And so I wondered, what does it actually mean? What is heaven like? Do we eat in heaven? Right? That would be nice to know, right? Do we have bodies? Do we play tennis? So important, life-changing questions of that sort. And so I actually went into the depth of it and say, let me understand what it means to be in heaven. What is it like in heaven? And then what is the timeline? We go by this frightful name of eschatology, but in simple terms, what does it actually mean? So that's what got me very curious. Wasn't going to be a book initially. It was just for my own education. And then as I got deep into it, I said, I'm sure I'm not the only one asking these questions, so it would be good to lay it out for other people to read as well.
Yeah, you mentioned 2020 and COVID. Did you have COVID when you started thinking about this, or were you just home?
I was home. I was home with more time on my hands because I wasn't driving 2 hours every day to work. So I said I'll use that time to good effect.
Got it. You mentioned converting to Christianity as an adult. Tell me a little bit about that story, if you could.
So I grew up in a Hindu family. I was a Brahmin, which is the kind of the priests or the Levites, and then when I went to college, I moved away from that and became an atheist. So for about 10 years, I was an atheist. And it occurred to me one day that as an atheist, I was asking a lot of questions and used that to point out that religions were not able to answer it. But I actually didn't answer any questions as an atheist. I was just asking them, And so multiple people came into my life who were very successful in what they did. One was a professor actually in Connecticut at Yale Medical School. And there's a couple of them who are entrepreneurs. One was a lawyer, all of whom I looked up to as being highly accomplished in their fields. They were all very analytical, scientific oriented, and they were Christians. And that simply was a big disconnect for me, saying, why would somebody smart and sharp also be a Christian? And as I started digging into it, they led me into how, science requires you to have a foundation which looks to God for meaning. And without God, you would actually not have science, So after a 5-year journey, I decided that, there is something to this which requires me to make a decision. And that's how I became a Christian.
Yeah. I'm curious, what did your family think when you went from, Hinduism to becoming an atheist? And then what do they think when you went from atheism to becoming a Christian? I'm curious as to what the chatter was like in your family.
Yeah, I think when I went to college, and the Indian Institute of Technology has a lot of very analytical people, so atheism isn't a big surprise over there. Virtually everyone around me was an atheist, and I went into it without asking any questions. That's what my tribe did, and hence that's what I did. My family, I don't think they reacted much to it. They figured it was a phase of life, and I would work my way out of it. When I became a Christian, maybe they thought, in one sense, it's a step up from being an atheist. At least he believes in something, even though in their opinion he was the wrong thing. Yeah, I think they had to cope with it. Yeah. And in some ways, they dumped on me on it, and but in other ways I had come to a conclusion on my own. It's not like anyone asked me to be a Christian. I actually really didn't know anyone growing up who was a Christian. I knew of Christian families, but no one I was close to. So it was my decision, and so at that point I didn't ask for permission.
Does I'm curious, because there are a group of people who believe that with Jesus and his story, we lose basically his life from 12, 13 years old until he starts public ministry at around 30. So it's a big period of time where we don't really have a formal record of. There are people who believe that he actually went to India.
That is true.
I'm curious as to what your take might be on that.
So I actually have a book which specifically looks at this, and I think it's called "Did Jesus Go to India?" My opinion is he probably didn't go to India. I think he probably was a carpenter and learned the skills of his fathers and actually worked there, right? While he grew spiritually and came to the realization that he was specially anointed by God as his son, because to him also I think it was a growing realization, of what he was called to do. So I do think Thomas went to India. The doubting Thomas, which would be actually good for India, because Thomas must have been an engineer, so worked out very well for the Indians. He did land in Kerala, which is one of the states in India, made his way close to Chennai, and was martyred over there, about 5 miles away from where I grew up. So, yeah.
Wow. So let's talk about your book. I'm curious to know more about it. What can you share?
So when I wrote the book, I realized I had to read a lot of theological books to make sure I was theologically accurate. And in this, when you talk about end times and rapture and tribulation and millennium, there's lots of theories, right? It's not that anyone has cornered the market on what is exactly the right answer. So even within the theological community, there's lots of ways of looking at it. What I was interested in doing was to say, I'm going to go with one of which is the simplest to understand, and so people can check it for themselves, right? But it may not be 100% accurate. I miss details of things, because obviously we don't fully understand everything there. We have lots of details, but there may be things which work differently. But I didn't want it to be a theological book, because how many people are going to pick up a theological book and read through this, right? So I wanted it to be a conversation. And, if you remember college days, you sit around with a bunch of buddies and a couple of beers and discuss the deep meaning of life, right? So this is a book like that of three friends who just graduated from college. They're working, and they get together once a week to understand these questions. Two of them have no Christian background. One of them does. So he's kind of leading the other two through it. And they dream. Every week they have dreams. And in their dreams, they're in the middle of tribulation, right? So how does someone who's not a Christian in the middle of tribulation, how do they interpret the events happening in the tribulation? Right. And so that's what two of them are going through. And then the third one explains it based on our understanding of Revelation and Daniel and all the other books. So it's a lighter read. It is not, there's no Bible references, but it is entirely based on the book of Revelation. It just, it puts it out as a story for people to look at, debate, and so on.
Yeah, that's interesting. I remember, do you remember the movie came out? Oh gosh, probably in the late 1980s, The Seventh Sign with Demi Moore. Dealt with the seven seals that
right, that's right,
in the book of Revelation.
Right,
and maybe it was called the Seven Seal. I can't remember. Then I'm getting it mixed up with an Iron Maiden song about the seven seals.
I was thinking of Iron Maiden the other day for some reason. I haven't heard them in 25 years, but I was thinking of them.
Well, I went to they played here in New Jersey a couple of nights ago, and I took my daughter. We went to go see Iron Maiden.
It was
fantastic. It was a great show.
Yeah.
And actually their drummer converted to Christianity years ago, which I thought that's an interesting story in and of itself, but I'm not interviewing him. I'm interviewing you. So how has reception of the book been?
Well, it's an Amazon bestseller, so that's good. What it has done is it's opened up the opportunity to have conversation with lots of different people about Jesus, because at the end of the day, I think Christianity is not as much a religion as it's a relationship with God and Jesus, but it's not always easy for people to have that conversation, whether it's at work or whether it's in any outside of a church. Most people are not quite sure how to have a conversation, So it's a combination of COVID and people starting to struggle with the things happening in in the world around us. And just writing the book opened up the opportunity to talk to lots of people. And I've been doing lots of podcasts, lots of videos on YouTube. And what has happened is many people have reached out either with questions or their own testimonies, sometimes with a lot of hate mail as well. So, which comes with the territory, I think. So I don't care that much about it, but it's, definitely lots of interest. I think the Spirit of God is moving in unbelievable ways. You see that amongst the Muslim community worldwide. You see that in India. You see that even in the US, even in colleges. I've been to some colleges to speak, and people are hungry for meaning, no doubt about it. They just want it to be comprehensible. I think a lot of people who are very analytical, like I am. So when we have to explain things in detail so they understand it, they can question it, they can debate over it. And we don't often do that. We live in a faith community sometimes, which doesn't give people the opportunity to ask a lot of questions, So that has been a real eye opener for me.
Yeah. The thing, I'm curious about so many things about what you just said. But I want to go back to this idea of science and religion being sort of, at each other's throats, maybe. And I tend to agree with you that, you cannot have, science without religion. And maybe religion is the wrong word. Maybe it's spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I think about it, scientists, are seeking something. They're seeking some kind of truth, right?
Right.
And, people of faith are also seeking some kind of truth. And there have been times when they have been at odds, right? I mean, if you go back to, before, the Enlightenment, now you had the church, sort of taking science on. You look at Galileo, you look
Copernicus,
exactly. And they're saying, how can you possibly say that, the earth is moving around the sun, right? The sun has to be moving around the earth because we have to be the center of the universe. But science also, tries to speak in absolutes. And I think what you hear from the scientific community is that they're always learning new things too. Like maybe they used to think that the atom was the smallest particle possible, and then they realize that there's something else out there that's even smaller. Right. And as you look at sort of the grand design of of the world, many scientists even come to the conclusion that there had to be some kind of intelligence behind this, because this could not have just come from 100% chance.
So you make a really good point. So why did men become scientific to begin with, right? So C.S. Lewis has a famous quote which says, men became scientific because they were looking for law in nature. And they were looking for law in nature because they believed in a lawgiver. Right. This is the only reason men became scientific. And when societies or communities did not start, or cultures did not start with this assumption that there's a lawgiver, they did not become scientific. Right. So it's really interesting. And so science, I found three parts of science. I'll be super brief on this, but there's three parts of science which require an intelligent mind behind it. One was the origin of the universe. Right. As soon as Einstein proposed his general theory of relativity, and it led to the Big Bang and said the universe started at some point in time, it begged the question, who choreographed the origin of the universe? Because it's a very choreographed event. It was not just a random event. And then you have the origin of the life, right? The first cell is so complex. Right. It's more complex, for example, than an iPhone. None of us would think that the iPhone didn't have a designer. I mean, of course, it has a designer. The complexity is so high. So if an iPhone needs a designer, what about the first cell? Right. And then there's the information in a cell. It's written in a language. Unlike English, which is a 26-letter alphabet, it's written in a 4-letter alphabet. And the only place we've seen language and coherent language, something which makes sense and not gibberish, is from a mind, And so science, and this is 3 out of maybe 10 different things that you look at, and where science gets to the point where it says we can no longer address this without addressing the intelligent mind behind this.
Yeah.
And that's actually what I wanted to bring out in the book, but in a more easy to read way than get into general theory of relativity,
Right. I mean, even Einstein, who was not a religious person, did believe that there was some kind of master plan to the universe, or some kind of grand design to the universe.
Right. He had a complex relationship with God. A lot of scientists do have that complex relationship. Sometimes they believe in certain parts of it, but they don't always see the intersection with physics or math or, the real life as we see it. They separate spiritual life and real life in a sense. But I think that's an unnecessary separation. I think you have to appeal to the spiritual to explain the physical. And then if you have to do that, it begs the question, did God just do it once, or is he part of my day-to-day life? Right. I would argue it's part of our day-to-day life. That's the whole point,
Yeah. Just because I do focus the show on writing and writers and authors, I'm curious, how was the process of writing this book? I assume, was this the first book you'd ever written?
First book, yes.
So what was the learning process of writing a book like for you?
There were the fun parts of it, and then there was the painful parts of it, right? I still don't know where to put the commas and the quotation marks and so on. And I think it's a really good idea to have an editor who specializes in this help out in these areas. I found a friend, her name was Jessica, and she was my editor, and actually turned out to be a really interesting critique as well, because she made the point in one part of my book where she said, this book is, you make this guy think in a certain way, by the way you develop this character, this guy would not think this way, right? And she gave me a woman's perspective on how this person would feel. I don't think much about feelings. So I was thinking about how he would think, not how he would feel. But I had built a character who would feel more things. So that was valuable to hear that. I had to learn not to get defensive about every editorial comment and so on, because obviously first time I'm doing it, I was super sensitive to it. I think writers probably like that. Eventually, it became a matter of discipline, saying I had to write something every day, and otherwise there is this inertia to say I'll push it off, for a couple of days and so on. And once I got into the writing flow, it's easy to write. I would of course come back and refine it and edit it and make it sound better and so on. But it was simply a daily exercise of saying spend an hour or 2 hours, or even if it's 15 minutes. I actually started off saying, let me do 15 minutes every day. Right? Because if I told myself, let me do 2 hours every day, the inertia, was so much that I wouldn't even start, But doing 15 minutes every day meant that it was easy for me to go past the 15 minutes and just continue on because I had a flow going on.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, to me, writing, it's like exercise. It's something you should do every day.
Yeah.
And especially if you want to get better at it. And, you can only hit flow. It's like, I liken it to, I'm a runner. So the runner's high, you run for an hour or 70 minutes. I can't remember, like usually when I start to feel it, but it's during the long runs, you get into this state where you're just doing it without thinking about it.
Right.
So the run is happening, but you're kind of disassociated from it somewhat. I get into that when I'm writing as well. So when I'm writing and I'm really into it, time almost seems to stop. The words just kind of come through me. And there are times when I've been thinking about this story and where it's going, and it'll take it a complete left turn because I'm in this other state of mind or this other state of being. It's almost like a meditative state. It's very hard to describe.
Right.
But then the words just kind of come and the story just kind of like, it's almost like I channel it through me. But that comes with, the discipline of doing it every day.
Right. Right. Exactly.
Sometimes it's hard.
Right.
Sometimes it's hard.
And you do it over months and years. Sometimes you even hate your own book, right? Because I've read chapter 1 so many times now, I don't want to read it again, right? That's part of the process. I'm sure everybody goes through the same thing, and sometimes that keeps things in perspective.
Yeah, I agree. So are you going to write another one? Do you have another one in you, Ganesh?
Once I find the right subject to write on, I don't want to write for the sake of writing. I want to write because it's something of value, and a message, important message. I was thinking if I did it the next time around, I have 3 characters in the book, 3 guys. But maybe I'll add some girls into it and get a different perspective on some of these questions and what matters to them. And if I did that, that's what I would do.
Yeah. Always. And women buy books a lot more than men.
That's true.
That's one thing that I learned along the way.
Right.
Having strong female characters that they can relate to is very important. But it sounds like this book has been a great tool, not only for your development, your own spiritual development, but also starting conversations and having conversations with people who normally don't talk about this stuff. So that's regardless of how many copies it sells, and I know it is a bestseller, that's a big win right there.
Absolutely. Yeah. So one thing I will say is, the book, by the way, is called Let Me Into Heaven. 3 computer scientists find their way to life. Now, I wrote it under a different name than Ganesh. It's under the name GVs. Right. And there's a reason I did that, because this is at the intersection of science and faith, and because this can be a very divisive subject, and because I wasn't sure how much, if I was ready to come out and share openly that it was me, I actually wrote it under a name. It took me a year and a half to say, here I am called to share the most valuable thing I think somebody could share, which is the gospel of Christ. And I'm doing my best to hide myself in this process. I need to come out of the closet. And I looked around the closet. There wasn't anyone else in the closet, and I was the only one there. And I said, no, I'm coming out and sharing that I am a Christ follower, and here is why, right? And I think that has beyond the book, that has been very freeing for me, and has enabled me to have a lot of conversations with people.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, Ganesh, I really do appreciate you stopping by Uncorking a Story and letting me uncork yours.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for listening to Uncorking a Story. If you'd like more information about today's guest or to find out more about Mike, go to uncorkingastory.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in every week to hear Mike Carlin uncork a new story.